In this video, we'll be going over more examples in understanding how are we able to figure out the greatest common factor and the least common multiples when comparing numbers. So let's start off by something that we are familiar with. Let's compare the factors and multiples of 24 and 36. Now, what factors do 24 and 36 share in common? Well, they're both divisible by 2. Are they also divisible by 3? Or are they also divisible by 8? Now, we want to find the greatest common factor possible. Now, we do not want to spend too much time guessing if a certain factor goes into this number. So remember, instead of using our calculators and keep pressing that division button, we want to go straight into the factor tree. Now, in multiplication, we're not limited to just only using 2 numbers to get our product. We can use more than 2 numbers. So let's break up 8. So which factors do they share in common? Both numbers are divisible by 3. They're also divisible by 2 as well, because 2 times 3 is equal to 6, and both numbers are divisible by 6. Or we can multiply 6 by a whole number, and depending on which number we use, we could get either 24 or 36. They also have another 2 as well. So taking our common factors that 24 and 36 share in common, 3 times 2 times 2 is equal to 12. So 12 is the largest number that goes into both 36 and 24. Or 12 times 2 is equal to 24. Or 12 times 36. Well, I say 12 times 3 is equal to 36. So drawing out our factor tree, not only we're able to find common factors, but we also are able to find the greatest common factor that they both share in common, which we just take the common factors and multiply them to get the greatest common factor of 12. Let's now compare the multiples of 24 and 36, and we want to find out what common multiples do they share in common. So something like 24 times a whole number, 36 times a whole number, and we should have a common multiple. And what common multiples do 24 and 36 share? Well, an obvious example is 24 times 36, but that's going to be too much time. So what some students do, they like to draw out a multiples table of the two numbers that they want to compare. And what do we have here? A common multiple that they both share. So 24. So 24 times 3 and 36 times 2, we would get our common multiple of 72. Now, is there any other way, any more productive way than just drawing out multiples of our numbers? Well, instead of drawing out our multiples table, and note that be careful, sometimes the numbers that you want to compare, it could take forever and we would draw a long line, perhaps a long paragraph in just finding common multiples. So what do you want to do? Take the factors of the numbers that we want to compare So they do share common factors of 3 and 6 and 12. So we circle all of the common factors that they share, which is equal to the greatest common factor of 12. 12 is the largest number that goes into 36 and 24. 12 times 3 is 36. 12 times 2 is 24. Now, we want to focus our attention on finding the least common multiple of 24 and 36. To do that, we take the greatest common factor of 24 and 36, and then we multiply the remaining factors that were not grouped in to find the GCF. So 12 times 3 is 36. 36 times 2 is 72. And just like that, using this formula, this is a much more productive way than just drawing out our tables of multiples of the numbers that we compare. So, oh, I should not have erased that. So why is it that when we want to compare the least common multiple, we have to take the greatest common factors of the numbers and also take the remaining factors that was left off from the grouping? Well, one way of explaining this is say, so 12 is a factor of both 24 and 36. Let's continue drawing some multiples of 12. So the numbers that we want to compare are 24 and 36. 12 is a factor of 72, as well as 72 is a multiple of 36 because 36 times 2 is 72, and 24 times 3 is 72. Now we want to find the least common multiple of the numbers that we want to compare, which is 24 and 36. So we take our greatest common factor of 24 and 36, which is 12, and we multiply it by the remaining factors that was left off from the grouping. So 12 times 3 is 36. 36 times 2 is 72. We'd also group these two factors here. So 3 times 2 is 12. Now, 12 times 6 is equal to 72. And this is basically our proof, our little formula, our explanation on why to find the least common multiple of the two numbers that we want to compare. This is why we had to find the greatest common factor that they share and the remaining factors that was left off from comparing the greatest common factor. Next up, let's go try another example of why you shouldn't use a calculator just to guess which factors share the numbers that we want to compare. So let's compare the factors of 24 and 96. Now what numbers are they divisible by? Well, they're divisible by 2, by 3, also by 6, 12. Now that's a lot. Maybe are they divisible by 16 or are they divisible by 24? See, we do not want to keep pushing the calculator button too much. So instead, basically, let's draw out our factor tree again. Now, which factors do they share in common? They're both divisible by 2. They're both divisible by 4. They're both divisible by 8. They're both divisible by 24. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 is equal to 24. So 24 is the largest number that could go into 96 and 24. And 24 times 4 is equal to 96. So using our factor tree here, we're able to visualize which factors go into 24 and 96 without spending a lot of time on using the calculator and comparing which factors that they share and multiply them all together. We're able to find the greatest common factor of 24 and 96, which is 24. Now let's compare the multiples of 24 and 96. So instead, some students, they like to draw out their multiples table. Actually, let me write this a bit bigger. Some students, they like to draw a multiples table. And look what we have here. 96 times 1 is 96. 24 times 4 is equal to 96. So we find our least common multiple. But again, for some numbers, it may take a long time than just drawing out the multiples table. So again, 24 and 96. Let's draw out our factors. So we take the greatest common factor of 24 and 96, and then the remaining factors that was not grouped in to find the GCF. We use them to find the least common multiple of 24 and 96, which is 96. And how does this work? How does how does finding the least common multiple of 24 and 96? We have to first take their greatest common factor and then taking the remaining factors that was left off from the grouping. So we know 24 is a factor of itself because 24 goes into 24 and 24 times 1 is 24. So 24 is a factor of 24 and a factor of 96. Now, 24 times 4 is 96. So 24 times 4 is 96. Now the least common multiple of 24 and 96, taking their greatest common factor, and then the remaining factors that was left off from the grouping. So 24 times 4 is equal to 96. Now why is it so important that we follow this formula? Well, again, we don't want to draw some long lines. Now, last example, comparing the factors and multiples of 16 and 27. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. 3 times 3 times 3 is equal to 27. Now there's a problem. We do not have any common factors, so no common factors. Now, how do we find the least common multiple of 16 and 27? How is it possible that you take 16 times any integer, 27 times any integer, and we would get the same common multiple? Well, let's first compare its factors. Well, what factors do they share in common? Well, what you gotta do, so that's right. If we are comparing two numbers and they do not even have a common factor, you have no choice but to multiply those two numbers. So 27 and 16, or 27 times 16 is 432. So now that you know how to analyze, to break in its numbers using the factor tree, comparing factors, finding the greatest common factor, and then using the greatest common factor to and then multiplying it by the remaining factors that was not grouped in, that's how we're able to find the least common multiple. So use the least common multiple formula and do not draw long lines such as so do not draw long lines such as 16, 32, 48, and 27, 54, and then blah 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 432. 432. So could you imagine drawing long paragraphs? No, you cannot. But now you are prepared to solve greatest common factors and least common multiple.